Hello, and welcome to Baha'i Blogcast, with me, your host, Rainn Wilson. This is where I interview members of the Baha'i Faith and other friends from all over the world about their hearts and minds and souls, their spiritual journeys, what they're interested in, and what makes them tick. Enjoy. Ladies and gentlemen of the internet and the blogosphere, I'm super duper excited to be speaking to one of my Baha'i heroines, Ruha Benjamin, Dr. Ruha Benjamin, this morning. Hi, Ruha.
Hi, good morning. Nice to talk to you. I'm thrilled.
So nice to talk to you. Thank you so much. I know how super busy you are right now, and making time to talk to this little podcast. We have, I think we're up to like 4 dozen listeners. So there's 4 dozen people who are about to have their minds blown. So that's fantastic.
Hi, guys.
In fact, you can thank each one individually.
All right.
There's time. So, cool. What's going on? What are you teaching at Princeton University, Dr. Ruha Benjamin?
Yeah, so this semester, fall 2017, I have one main class that I teach, which is called Black to the Future, Science, Fiction, and Society. And it's a class that's looking at all these emerging technologies that are coming on the scene, thinking about the social dimensions of technology, how they can very easily, if we're not careful, reproduce all kinds of inequalities that already exist, but they also have the potential to challenge our existing hierarchies, whether it has to do with race or class or gender. So one of the phenomena that we're looking at in the class is the whole thing around racist robots and how all these new algorithms that make all kind of decisions in our lives, because we're not really thinking carefully about what goes into the design process, often reproduce the biases that many of us hold. And so this class is fun to teach because we're also thinking about how to design differently. So I try not to leave my students pessimistic at the end, and we try to do hands-on projects that's thinking about how to change the world, not just study it.
Wow, I have so many questions. Number one, if there was a movie about a racist robot, I could play that. I could play the racist robot.
That's where your mind goes.
Number
already.
one.
Let's talk scripts after
So
this.
yeah, okay, let's develop something here. Number one. Number two, can you give me an example of, because I know these bots and these algorithms are working all the time behind the scenes, and there's so much of what's disrupting the American political process and the kind of the very narrow news and information that we all get. So can you give me an example of one?
Sure. I'll give you 3 quick examples. One is what you just described as a chat bot that was released on Twitter. The idea was that this algorithm would learn how to speak in conversation with other Twitter users. But because of all the things that other people were tweeting at Tay, which was the name given to her, she very quickly, in the matter of a few hours, started tweeting things like, the Nazis were right. We should kill all the Jews. I effing hate feminists. They should all die, because she was in conversation with people who were tweeting these things at her. So not only was Tay become quickly racist, but sexist and a genocide apologist in many ways. And so Microsoft had to quickly take her offline, and so that was
just
one example.
Mirroring a robot mirroring the hate that it saw online.
Yeah. So that's the most obvious kind of like the mirroring. But then there's the very much more deliberate designing of algorithms without taking into consideration the biases that data scientists and the software designers actually hold, the blind spots, we might think of them. So there was a launch of an online beauty contest in which the designers created 5 robot algorithms to judge beauty, and people sent in selfies from all over the world, 6,000 selfies, every continent. And these algorithms were meant to judge the beauty based on wrinkles and symmetry and like bumps on the face. And so the training sets that the designers used to train the algorithms to recognize beauty, they themselves were biased. So then the winners were almost all white and fit a very narrow slice of the beauty standard that we know is itself socially produced, right? It's not a universal standard of beauty. But because
So
the designer,
in that case, it's the designer's bias and kind of
and
unwitting
assumptions.
bias as
Yes,
they were doing the
exactly.
programming that influenced this whole technology.
Exactly. So that's
Mhm.
another route that's much more it's more concrete because you can point to like who the people were who created the training sets for the algorithms. The other more diffuse ideas that, so many of these the most what we would call the intelligent machines are learning from us. And so they're also learning the good and the bad. And so we want to try to I kind of think of it like raising kids, right? And so they pick up everything that you are and you do. And so what we try to do with our kids, we want them to be better than us, right? We want to say,
Mm.
I have all these things, but I also want you to give you a lens to move in the world that's a higher standard. And so what does it mean to raise our robots with a higher standard than we have, to not just reflect us, but try to push us to be better in
Well, you
some
said
way?
that at the beginning that there's an opportunity here to kind of challenge the status quo
Yeah.
and this world, the new world of technology, to kind of look at the lens of racial inequality and racial injustice through technology and make it a new
Yeah.
playing field. So what positive things do you give your students to shoot
Yeah.
for in this world?
Yeah, I mean, one of the principles there's a number of principles that we sort of talk about because there's no formula, but there's a kind of things you should think about when you're going to go about designing technology. One is that often the market logics of getting things on the market faster and quicker prevent us to really think carefully about the social dimensions of what we're producing because we're racing against other companies to get our thing out first, right? And so partly what we have to do in terms of more socially conscious design is find ways to go slower with more deliberate sort of thought. And so one of the things to keep in mind is that the history that exists in the world, in terms of race, like if you think about segregated neighborhoods, that is often going to get reproduced in the technology. So Facebook has this thing where companies can go and target different consumers, like when
Hmm.
you're on Facebook.
Sure.
And they created a function called ethnic affinities, which means that real estate companies could go and choose which ethnic groups they wanted their ads to reach, which meant they could also take out certain ethnic groups from getting their ads. So you
Mm.
could choose, I don't want my ad to be seen by Latinos or African Americans, which goes against civil rights law. We've created all these laws that says you can't discriminate in real estate practices because that was that reproduces certain forms of inequality. But now we have technological means to do it, where a company doesn't have to go directly to someone who's looking for a house and say, "No, this neighborhood is not for you." But in showing their ads through these targeted advertisements, they can exclude people. And so members of Congress had to write Zuckerberg, and now you can no longer do that. So that was after the fact. They realized, oh, this can be used to harm people.
Mm.
But what about in the original design of that function? They thought about that to begin with and said, "Do we really want to give companies the opportunity to exclude ethnic groups?"
Mm. That's
And
amazing.
so that's the after the fact. So we want to try to build some of that thought in the upstream process to begin with.
That's fantastic. How did I have so many questions, and we're going to get into your history and backstory and
Yeah,
philosophy and everything, but how did you get into this area? This is
yeah,
that's why it's so wild. I mean, it's a new
yeah.
frontier.
Yeah, so I went to grad school in California, and California fancies itself as like on the cutting edge of everything, right? And so at the time when I was at Berkeley, this huge initiative was being passed in California to invest in stem cell research, where everyday people could go to the ballot box, vote, okay, do we want to invest $3 billion into stem cell research, taxpayers' money? And so we voted in favor of this initiative. This whole state agency was created, and this was around the time that I was looking for a dissertation project. And I thought, okay, this got sold really quickly to the public. Let me study this from the inside out. So I got an affiliation with this stem cell agency and was thinking really, I just wanted to know what were the social dimensions of this scientific initiative? What groups would be included? Who was it meant to benefit? And so asking sociological questions about something that was seen as a strictly scientific initiative. And so my first book was around that entire process of looking, it was called People Science. And it was looking at, how stem cell research affects people with different disabilities, different racial ethnic groups, class strata. So one of the key things about that project was that at the same time that we invested in this cutting edge futuristic technology around regenerative medicine, the majority of the public voted against an initiative that would have allowed more basic health care to Californians, right? And so we said, no, we're not going to expand basic health care, but we are going to invest in this cutting edge research. And so for me, that asymmetry is what I care a lot about. When people don't have the basics, but an elite can have us invest in something that is so magical, you
Mhm.
know. And so that same set of questions I bring to the questions around algorithms, the questions around different technologies and fields that have a lot of promise,
Mhm.
right? And claim to better the world, but I'm always kind of interested in the underside. What's not being
Because
talked about?
how could our cultural proclivities not seep into these other areas? How could they not?
Yeah, that's the thing, but the way that we're often trained around science and technology is it happens in a bubble.
Mm,
It's removed, it's asocial, it's ahistorical, and we just need to wait for the benefits to trickle down to us,
mm,
right?
mhm,
And what this body of work that I've been contributing to says is, "No, it's already all humans doing it.
mhm.
We're all human, we're doing it, we're creating this stuff." And so whatever our tendencies are and when it comes to like the economy or education, it's also going to affect science and technology. It's part of life.
That's fantastic. My wife and I went to the premiere of the new Star Trek Discovery show last night. Yes, she's giving me the live long and prosper sign. Thank you. Um, and one of the most incredible things, there's been a huge backlash against the show because it's incredibly diverse. I mean, they
Yes.
have the most diverse Star Trek bridge
Yeah.
you've ever seen.
Yeah.
And in the pilot episode, the captain is an Asian woman in her 40s or 50s, and the
Mhm.
first mate is an African American woman. And what's amazing about it, and I mean, it was just so beautiful. No one,
Mm.
no one referenced it.
Mhm.
Two
Mhm.
powerful women
Mhm.
were running the ship. They
Yeah.
go on an adventures together. They're
Yeah.
they're kicking butt and taking names. They're super
Yeah.
smart, but no one's kind of like, "Wow, these women are really smart,"
Yeah.
or "These
Yeah.
people of color are super smart," or
Yeah.
anything like that. Because
Yeah.
that's one of the great things I think science fiction does. You're talking about science. I'm talking about science
Yeah.
fiction.
I love it. I love it. Yeah.
Is science fiction can just kind of put a pause in where we are
Yes.
as a race. And Gene Roddenberry's vision, of course, the
Mhm.
first interracial kiss on television happened on
Yeah.
Star Trek,
Yeah.
um, is to show like, look, this is the human race, and we've progressed to a
Exactly.
certain point where we're exploring space and we're setting up an international peaceful federation, and all
Yeah.
human beings from this planet are involved in this, and it doesn't
Yes.
matter their age or race or
Yeah.
ethnicity. They're out exploring space and being awesome.
Yeah, so it creates a new normal, like where as you said, it's not even something to be commented on because it is what it is, right? And so in this class that I teach and the work that I do, I'm trying to fuse science fiction because to me, a lot of the so-called real science is infused with stories and narratives. Like there's fictions in the science that we want to think about, but in stuff like Star Trek, there are new facts that are being sort of produced about how we can live together, in ways that defy all of these categories that we think are so self-evident. And so to me, that boundary between what's fictional and what's the truth gets really blurry. And I love that blurriness that you're describing in Star Trek.
I think for me, as a fan of the original series back in the 70s and being a little
Mhm.
kid and growing up a Baha'i kid, like,
Mhm.
I think my love of both kind of fused together
Yeah.
because this ideal world where
Yeah.
humanity as a species
Yeah.
um, are exploring and growing and maturing
Yeah.
together. It's Baha'u'llah's vision,
Yeah.
as
Exactly.
seen through this lens of
Yeah.
science fiction.
Yeah, my dad learned about the faith in the '70s in Los Angeles, and he was a lifelong Trekkie. That's where I inherited that. And so when my family went pioneering to the Marshall Islands in the mid '90s, before Apple TV, before Netflix, all I had were boxes and boxes of his Star Trek tapes, VHS tapes. That was my only entertainment for like 9 months. I watched every episode, I watched them multiple times, and that that I th my the way that you described it, I think is really what, it's emblematic of why he loved the series so much. As he was learning about the faith, he
Hmm.
also became more and more enthralled by just this vision of a future that defies the reality that we think we're so entrenched in.
Yeah.
And fiction has that way of saying, no, actually, if we can imagine something differently, we can make it a reality as well.
Nice. Well said. How old were you when you went to the Marshall Islands?
I was 14 years old.
And how long were you there?
So I was there with my parents for 9 months, then I went to boarding school in Southern Africa. They were there for 6 years. So
So
I
they
went
they
with
had you
them.
in an island in the South Pacific, and they're like, okay, she's feeling a little left out here. We're
No,
out of the mainstream. We need her to, so let's send her to boarding school. I know,
no,
in South Africa. How does that
no.
happen?
So that the plan to go to boarding school happened before the plan to go to the Marshall
Okay.
Islands. So I had already had to apply to this international school there, and just the way that the calendar for that school is, it didn't start until 9 months after we were moving. So I moved with them, and then I went to boarding school for 2 years, and then I would visit them occasionally while they were there for the 6 years in the Marshall Islands.
Wow.
Yeah.
So where did you grow up before 14?
Yeah, so I was born in India. That's where my mom's side of the family's from. I moved to LA when I was 3 years old. Spent 3 to 9 years old in LA, then moved to South Carolina, where my parents worked at Louis Gregory Baha'i Institute in South Carolina. So I was there from 9 to 14. And then we went to the Marshall Islands. So I haven't lived anywhere more than 6 years.
You were a true world citizen. India to LA to
Hey.
South Carolina to Marshall Islands to South Africa. So,
Yeah.
your parents, your dad's African American, your mom
Mhm,
is Persian Indian.
mhm.
Um, what's that like? What perspective does that give you?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question. I think that one way to think about it is that I always look at the world from the Southern perspective. That's the way I describe it. The Southern perspective as in, often in terms of the geography of the globe, but also in terms of a city. The southern part of the city often is like where
The other
the the
side of the
the, the
tracks.
underside of the tracks, right? And so wherever I've lived, I've sort of taken on that perspective. I think partly as a function of my parents, but also the choices that they've made, not just their identities, but where they've chosen to live, what kind of work they've chosen to do. And so I bring that perspective even to my own research as a scholar. Is like, okay, this great, wonderful, shiny thing that I'm being presented, let me look at it from the underside, like what's being left out, what's put in the dark. And so I think that perspective from below, to think about what questions are being ignored, whose voices aren't heard, is something that is kind of a constant refrain for me as a function, I think, of who they are, the choices that they've made, and just how they've just kind of lived their own, they haven't followed a script, right? And so my dad was 19 when he went with a group of youth from LA to India to do some travel teaching. And they met at a Baha'i youth conference. My mom was there for college, and she was giving a talk at this youth conference. And the day after they met, they decided to get married. And a month later, they got married, and they got the consent and agreement of both sides of the family. My dad's telegramming my African American grandma in LA, "I want to marry this Indian girl." My mom is asking my grandfather in another small town in India, "I want to marry this African American man." And it also a testimony to the whole family that they embraced their union, because a lot of times when people are trying to defy the scripts that they're given, the families stand in the way, and the families kind of create disunity by not supporting the choice. And so I feel like I have an example in my folks, but also in my extended families who have always just supported their choices and said, "No, like, let's tear up the scripts. Let's do what we wanna do."
That's an incredible story. So it really took a lot of bravery on your mom's part to kind of say, uh, because there's a very powerful script of, people from a certain ethnic group marrying a person of that same ethnic group, and
Yeah.
especially in places like Persia and Iran and all the Middle Eastern countries. Um, so to break away from that,
Yeah,
huge.
yeah. Yeah, I think both of them really, I mean, we all groups have sort of these, scripts about, what gains you status and what has you lose status. And that one of the things I think, is their touchstone in terms of the Baha'i faith is that it creates a new standard for what to value, right? And it says, okay, that's nice. Your culture has this standard, your culture has this standard. None that's all irrelevant. Like the standard is not about, having to do with certain groups, being, more honored than others, and there's a powerful global denigration of black people in many, many
Yeah.
countries. And so I think that one of the powerful correctives that Baha'u'llah brings is to say that that global anti-blackness is actually completely false. And
Hmm.
so the fact that the manifestation says that black people are akin to the pupil of the eye that is dark in color but is a fount of light completely reframes what darkness and black people have to offer the entire planet. And I think because my mom was a Baha'i, her family was a Baha'i, they had a different standard than their cultural group had with respect to recognizing the inherent nobility of my father. And so in that respect, there wasn't a lot of pushback. There wasn't any
Oh, that's
pushback.
wonderful. So
Yeah.
the family
Yeah.
embraced it.
Absolutely.
And what I love
Yeah.
about that quote too is that you need the blackness of the
Yeah.
pupil of the eye in order to
Yeah.
see. You need
Exactly.
it to be black. It's not just
Exactly.
a good idea or
Yeah.
something nice or just how things work. Like
Yeah.
you need
That's a really good. Yeah.
you need that blackness in order to get the light in and refract it in the right way. I don't know
Yeah.
exactly how the eyeball works, but
Yeah, you're
um,
right on. My mom ha my mo one of my mom's, one of the words she hates the most is tolerance, because
yes,
that implies a sense like, "Okay, we'll put up with you.
yeah,
We'll be respectful in a very superficial way."
yeah,
And so what you're describing is that it's not tolerance of Blackness, it's actually a recognition that you need it, and
yeah.
it's the inherent worth of it, and I think that reframing is so core to what Baha'u'llah had to bring
I
humanity.
think I mentioned it on this podcast before, but the thing that also really bugs me is
Yeah.
the coexist bumper stickers with the
Oh
religious
yeah.
symbols, because that's the same thing as tolerance. Like coexist. No, we're not talking about Well, maybe people on the outside are talking about just coexisting and not blowing each other up.
Yeah.
That's fine. But
Yeah.
The revolutionary Baha'i take is
Yeah.
not coexist, like embrace,
Yes. Absolutely.
dialogue, get together, consult,
Yeah.
work together,
Yes.
understand each other, and go through
Yeah.
that really tough, difficult
Yeah, it's
stuff.
messy. It's messy. Like coexisting tolerance, it's very neat and pretty. It's very like, International Food Day. Everyone come in their cultural garb.
Epcot
It's
Center.
it's pretty, you know what I mean? And it's good for photos. But the real work, I think, is messy. It's like you don't want to take a selfie. It's like you don't it's not cute. And I think that's what we need to embrace is that struggle aspect of what unity is about because one of the other reframings that relates to this that I think we don't fully appreciate is that, the Baha'i faith says that in order to have unity, you need justice. Like justice is a prerequisite to unity. And so, it's not a superficial unity of just living together. It's that you actually have to reorder things to be more just so that you can achieve a deeper level of unity. And it's messy.
Hmm. It's
Yeah.
difficult.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you're 14 years old and you're living in the Marshall Islands. What's that
Yeah.
like?
Yeah, I mean, it was a fantastic experience. One, I was out of school for 9 months, and I was doing a kind of early, year of service. I approached it like that, which is what Baha'i youth are often encouraged to do after high school, but this was sort of in the middle of my high school experience, and so I got to really travel to different islands. I got to connect with folks from, all over the Marshall Islands and other areas in the Pacific who would come there. I got to see the devastation wrought by the U.S. military base there. One of
Mm,
the touchstones for me is, the juxtaposition of the island Kwajalein, where we have our military base, and next door there's another island, Ebi, where people have been displaced and where the vegetation is very sparse. It's like a shanty town where, rates of chronic illness and infectious disease are rampant. And it's engineered, right? So it's an engineered impoverishment. And so, but the Kwajalein, where the U.S. Army base was, where we used to go to get like Baskin Robbins ice cream and hang out. It's like golf courses and
uh,
green grass, and you would think it was any suburb in the US, but you're in the middle of the Pacific. It's like a made for film kind of lost, ideal place next to, Ebi. And so for me, one of the ideas that I still draw on from that experience is that all of the inequality that we think has just sort of naturally evolved has actually been engineered. Like there have been people that have made decisions that, they could have made different decisions, in other words. And so when you think about, how do we go about changing the status quo? A lot of times when you raise that, people say, "Oh, you're trying to go against human nature," or "You're trying to do something that's so unnatural." If you talk about the oneness of humanity, I think we're naturally tribal people. We don't want to be together. All of those assumptions about what we're naturally like run against reality and history that shows that people have engineered separation, they've engineered inequality, and now we take it as natural. And so, in some ways, it gives me hope that we can engineer something different. We can
mm.
create something different. Yeah.
I just looked, I had a question about Marshall Islands and I looked up and it's, of course, the islands are named after British explorer John Marshall. And I love
Mm,
how that's happened all over
yes.
the South
Yeah.
Pacific and all over the
Yeah.
world. And, but historically, the islands were known as
Mm,
Jolet Gen Anij, or
mm,
gifts from God. So the
wow.
islanders used to call their
Yeah.
islands the
Yeah.
gifts from God.
That's powerful. Yeah. I mean, so many of the things that are thought of now as like culturally Marshallese are imports from like Americans and other colonizers, right? The names that people name their kids,
Hmm.
the folk dancing and other things are these kind of versions of American and other cultures. So the inherent nobility of the Marshallese, through processes of colonization has really been eroded.
Hmm. Now, the Baha'i community is pretty strong there, I
Yeah.
understand.
Yep. Yeah, they have a strong Baha'i community there and throughout the Pacific, really.
Yeah. So, Ruha, let's get a little bit personal now. You're married and a mom.
Yep.
How did you meet your husband? And I understand he's not a
Yeah.
Baha'i?
Yeah, that's right. And so we met through mutual friends. Over 20 years ago, we met in New York. I was going back to school in Swaziland, and we kept in touch. And we have two sons who are 13 and 16. And marriage is hard. I think that Baha'is maybe along with everybody else, has a very Hollywood version of what living, with another human being is going to be like in terms of being married. Very romantic Valentine's Day version, and I think that we don't. Most of us, I certainly didn't go into it with a clear sense of the challenges about what it means to rub your ego up against someone else's every single day, and the point of marriage being to sort of shave off a little bit more of your ego as
Ah,
the
isn't that
years
kind
go
of the
by.
point of life, though,
That is
really?
the point of life, but I think marriage is the ground zero for that. I
Someone
don't
said,
really.
I think it was Marianne Williamson said that marriage is a soul-growing machine.
Yes, I love that. I love that. I mean, if you think about what does it mean to like, just to work with someone day in and day out. You don't really have many other contexts to do it at this level of intensity. And so it's both a mirror in terms of all of the things that we each need to work on to do that growing, but it's like it's a real testing ground, I think. And so just approaching it with that sense that struggle should be is a part of it. I think it's just a better way to approach it as opposed to thinking it's just supposed to make you feel good all the time, you
So
know?
you we're gonna get a little bit later to your talk
Yeah.
at the LA Baha'i Center. I know it's a talk you do a lot, and you call it the
Yeah.
beautiful struggle. So
Yes.
marriage is a different kind of beautiful
It is.
struggle. I
It
mean, a
is.
fight
I
against
think
injustice is a beautiful struggle,
exactly.
but I love the word struggle
Yeah,
because it's like you said before, it's messy,
it
and
is.
people want things to be clean and easy.
They want to be clean and easy, and I think, like, relationships and marriage in particular, like, it's so shrouded in fantasy and fairy dust that as soon as people, like, get a whiff of, "Okay, this is a relationship that is meant to make you grow," and growth anything that grows, things have to break apart
Yeah,
first, and if you
yeah.
think about that, the process of breaking things down to grow, it's not something we are taught to embrace. And so I think yes, the same approach to social justice and changing and growing society applies to ourselves, and marriage is like that. So I think my own self-talk when it comes to marriage is like being very grateful for when the times are good and when everything seems to be going good, but also just being ready for the struggle part of it and the ego shedding part of it as well.
That's beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. The you got two teenage boys. What's that like?
Yeah. It's fantastic. They 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 make me happy. I think the one of the main struggles I find as a parent is equipping them with a lens to read the reality that they live in terms of all of the craziness, but also, giving them a real sense of their own nobility and their own worth because that's not often reflected back at them. And so
Yeah,
trying
it's
to hold those 2 things at the same time, like the reality check, the real talk, but then the higher standard, and the true purpose of, why we're here.
that must be an incredible challenge. We're raising one teenage boy,
Mm,
and it's hard. And he's
yeah,
a lily white boy in the lily white suburbs,
yeah,
where it's reflected back to him that he is of worth and
yeah,
potential, and he could
yeah,
be running Silicon Valley, in
yeah,
20 years or something like that. So I
yeah,
imagine, and by the way, Ruha, as you know, most of our listeners are not from the States. And every
yeah.
country has its
Oh,
own issues of racism,
yes.
but you know,
Yeah, it definitely applies, and whether it has to do with race or class or gender, or nationality, citizenship, I think whatever those axes of difference that create hierarchies and create status, that are founded on falsehoods, I
yeah,
think every society has to deal with it. So parenting in that context, I think you could gather parents from all over the world to have a conversation, and there would be some striking resonances no matter where that is, because what often parents do, especially those parents whose children, their worth is being reflected back at them by the hierarchies that exist, they often choose not to equip their children with the lens on the reality of what's happening. It's often, okay, well, things are working for us. Let's have rose tinted lenses as opposed to thinking seriously about how other people are being affected. And so I think there's a different set of challenges when you are in the position of privilege or power in a society. Your challenge is not to keep your child in a bubble, right? And to say that in fact your fate, your well-being is bound up with the well-being of people who are being harmed in this society. It's not a separate reality, and that if you think about one of the set of statistics that strikes me is how people who live in more unequal societies, even at the state level in the US, the privileged people in those contexts die younger and die from a more, a host of diseases than the privileged strata in more equal places. That is, in a more equal society, when you are on top, you actually benefit more than
Yeah,
if it was more unequal. I don't know if I'm making it clear. In other words, everyone benefits when things
right.
are more fair and more just. It's not just those on the bottom. And so I think again thinking about, when you live in a context that is running completely against our spiritual oneness, whether you're conscious of it or not, you are internalizing that. Your body is
Yeah.
internalizing the falsehood. You are more anxious. When you have to hold on and you're monopolizing power or resources, you internalize that. You have to build higher gates around your house. You have to get more security. You have to worry about someone taking your stuff. And so all of that
It's not a
anxiety, yes,
natural human state
it's
to be in.
not a natural human state. And the thing is, so, you feel that you are on one level certainly have it better than those who are being robbed of all of these resources, but at the same time, your soul knows it's not right. Your body, in fact, internalizes the falsehood. And so in many ways, we have all kinds of, chronic illnesses that are affecting white privileged people. Right now, we have an opioid epidemic ravaging the country, some 800 deaths a week. And so much of that can be attributed to being overserved in some ways by a society where other people are being harmed. And so I think we all have a stake in this. This is not, when we talk about, in the Baha'i Faith, when we talk about justice, this is not about charity work, right? It's not about giving something to someone who doesn't have. It's about all of us being bound together. We all have a stake in bettering this context.
Good. Well, let's dig into it. So, and I
Yeah,
want to come back to your sons too.
yeah.
So, um, you gave an amazing talk at the LA at the Santa Monica Baha'i Center that we'll do a link to. People should
Hmm.
listen to it.
Hmm.
You hit hard on this stuff, and it's really exciting to listen to.
Hmm.
What, in your opinion,
Hmm.
what's my job? What's my job?
Hmm.
I'm the epitome of privilege. I'm a
Hmm.
suburban white dude. I've got
Hmm.
plenty of money.
Hmm.
I'm a Baha'i.
Hmm.
So what is I know that sounds like an odd question, but
Hmm.
from your point of view,
Hmm.
what would be the best use of my time, money, and attention?
Yeah. And so the way that I think about it is, you have a circle of influence. Some circles are wider than others, and I think our all of our jobs is to um, disrupt and challenge the status quo in our circle. And raising the level of discourse, challenging the assumptions that people have. And I think white people should be on the front lines of challenging other white people to think more carefully about their assumptions, about their biases and their prejudices, and so I think how you do that is twofold. One is to educate yourself more and more, whether that has to do with committing, say, 20, 30 minutes a day to reading some text that is around, racial inequality in this country, or watching a podcast or a webinar. So one piece of it is knowing things that are more informed, not just relying on your good intention. And the other thing is for all of us to develop more courage to do that disruptive work, right? And so, at the level of comedy is ground zero for challenging us to think about all of our assumptions, but it's also a place that can reproduce our notions about, race. So racial jokes, is like one end, but also the challenging the status quo is on the other. And so in your own context, thinking about how can I use this space, one, to try to challenge the racism that pervades comedy,
Yeah.
but also, and then to use it also to say, okay, let's think differently about this, right? And so we each have our own unique sphere of influence, and we shouldn't just focus on the bad that's going on there or pretend that it's all hunky dory,
Right.
right? And so
And
that's the way I think about it.
that's beautiful. Thank you. And you talked earlier about rose-colored glasses, and I know you mentioned about the Baha'i community sometimes gets into a rose-colored glasses kind of viewpoint. Can you describe that?
Yeah. Yeah, and so, we have incredible writings and principles that are raising the standard and calling us to our true selves and talking about the oneness of humanity. And oftentimes we use that as a way not to deal with the reality that we currently live in, right? And so we, as opposed to dealing with the injustices all around us, we jump over that and we say, okay, but no, we're one. So as if talking about the terrible things that are going on are in fact producing them. No, so we have to talk about and deal with the reality that we live in to get to this higher place that we want to, right? And so I often use the analogy of going to the doctor and you feel something's wrong with you, but do you tell the doctor, no, just tell, give me a good diagnosis. I don't care what's actually going on, but no, you want to know the reality so you can tackle it with greater precision and accuracy to actually get better. And so with our social ills, I think a lot of times people feel uncomfortable dealing with the messy and dealing with the injustices, not just the injustices out there, but in the Baha'i community because we're human and we bring it into our
And
community life.
we kind of want to go as a community sometimes straight to the Kumbaya moments,
Yes.
kind of
Yeah.
like having a
Yes.
multicultural tapestry with a lot of hugs and
Yes.
and a potluck with lots of different
Yeah.
styles of foods, but we don't want to really look at
Yeah.
some of the messier stuff.
Yeah, and I understand the propensity to do that is that we want to, foster a vision of how we can live well together and live in a loving communities. But loving often a superficial idea of hugs and kisses and good food. When, if you think about it, like if you love your child and there's a fire on the stove and they're putting their hand on it, loving in that moment is swatting that child's hand away. You know what I mean? Loving isn't only the feel good, it's also the hard and it's getting people out of harm's way. And so I think we need to broaden our idea of what love feels like and looks like.
And that goes back to marriage because real intimacy with someone means conflict and it
Yes.
means argument and means some tough
Yeah.
conversations. And
Yes.
that actually leads to a deeper love. But a lot of people
Yes.
skip that,
Yes.
kind of sweep that stuff under the rug, and then they find
It's
themselves divorced in 5 years because they
yeah.
haven't really dealt with the nitty gritty. And that leads to a greater bonding and a greater
Yes.
love.
Yeah, and it's that they wanna skip it, but also when they get to those moments, they think that it's a sign that the love is not there or the love is gone or was never there because we don't have this broader understanding of what love looks like and feels like. It doesn't always make us feel good, right? And
Yeah.
so in that moment, again, thinking about what growth is, like, it's not something that's just about, patting on each other on the back. Growth is breaking things down, which is very like difficult and hard and it's painful at times. So part of my wish in terms of just community life generally, both for Baha'is and everyone, is that we're equipped with a better, keener sense of what to expect in marriage, what the purpose of marriage is, because I think so often when our expectations and the reality is so far apart, like it's that gap between expectations and reality that's the cause of disillusionment. But what if our expectations were closer in line with what actually happens? I think people would be more equipped to deal with things when they actually are confronted with them.
You talked about disrupting. Um,
Mm,
Abdu'l-Baha came to America
mm,
101 years ago. He did a
mhm,
little bit of
mm.
disrupting on a lot of different levels. I know you talk about
Yeah.
that. Can you give us
Yeah.
some of your thoughts?
Yeah. Yeah, so Abdul-Baha, the son of the Prophet founder Baha'u'llah, who is held up as, our great example of what it means to live a Baha'i life. And again, I think sometimes we focus on the versions of love that he showed people that are in sync with our very narrow idea of love as sweet and it pats on the back. But he was very disruptive on many levels. One of the things that he did when he traveled throughout the US and Europe was he befriended the people who were often the lower status of those societies, and that was very hard for the people who were even his hosts in various cities to deal with because they were trying to show him and get him to rub elbows with the elites, right? Like all the big names. And he would do that, but he would also bring into their company the lower status people who he saw as just as noble. And so, for example, when he was visiting the US, he had the chance to meet Louis Gregory, and who's African American lawyer, civil rights activist, and Baha'i. And at the time, the hosts of this gathering wanted Louis Gregory to eat in the kitchen, which was the
Oh, man.
standard of the time. And Abdu'l-Baha wasn't having it. Not only did he invite him into the main dining room, but he also placed him at his seat of honor right next to him, this totally disrupting the hierarchies at the time.
And what
No,
Abdu'l-Baha didn't do is kind of
yeah,
go, well, I don't want to do that because it might make people
yes,
feel uncomfortable in the dining room.
exactly,
He went for
exactly.
justice rather than,
Exactly. About worrying about people feeling uncomfortable because he understood that that comfort is not unity, right? That if that unity that they are all the same and of the same level is predicated on subordinating another human being, that is not true unity. And so he understood we have to go through the discomfort to get to the true unity, to get to the true justice. And so you have to basically deal with it. Deal with the fact that I'm bringing this person in the place of honor. And there are many other ways. One way I don't think that we really highlight that just strikes me, and maybe I'm making it up, is just the way he moved in the world also defied the expectations and norms about how, for example, we expect outsiders in any society to assimilate to the dominant culture of that society, whether through the way that we talk or dress. We expect assimilation as a predicate for inclusion. We'll include you as long as you are like us, right? And so Abdu'l-Baha moved through Europe and the US, and he didn't assimilate in the way that he dressed at the time. It was very customary for people from the region of the world he was to have these really sleek wax mustaches that were very long and windy, and very nice tailored European suits. And he rocked his robe and his turban, and his beard was all puffy and out, you know. And to me, no, he didn't comment on it directly, and you don't find any stories about it, but it just strikes me as the embodiment of a radical kind of inclusion, that inclusion has to accept people for everything that they are, not requiring them to conform as the basis of inclusion. And to me, I love that model because again, it challenges us in terms of what true unity and justice can look like.
so I just heard Dr. Nader Saidi speak at this bicentenary event, and he said something. He's on such another level of
Mm,
thought and the way he puts ideas together, but he talked about the how revolutionary it was, the concept of unity in diversity, and that
mhm,
this is the first time that
mhm,
someone has, as a spiritual leader, uh,
mhm.
summoned us to unity in diversity as opposed to unity in sameness. We've
Yes.
always had unity in sameness. You
Yeah.
know, in the British Empire, if everyone had tea at the same time and wore an ascot and had certain ideals and worshiped the queen, then that was a certain kind of unity that could be
Yeah.
created from sameness. But
Yes.
that this is a really radical step.
Yes, yes, it is, absolutely. And I think the challenge for us now is that we have to take that because it's such a catchy phrase, and we have to think about what does it mean to make that that principle of unity and diversity. How do we test ourselves with it, right? So it's one thing to say it, but one of the things I talk about a lot in the talk is how do we take these principles, right, that are kind of like theories about human nature and society, and actually work with them in our everyday life, right? What would it mean to take our gatherings and think about how do we challenge ourselves to be more diverse so that we can get to a deeper level of unity, as opposed to just say unity and diversity? It's like, okay, how do we change things up and see, really, do we believe this?
Hmm.
Or do we have a limit where no, only these kinds of behaviors or these kinds of expectations will be honored. Everything else is not reverent enough, let's
But
say.
diversity doesn't just mean dress and skin
Yeah.
color. Diversity is experience,
Yep.
family history,
Yeah.
uh, pain, and point of view
Yeah.
from someone. So we're having unity in a diversity of thought and life experience. So
Yeah.
I know for me as one of the truly privileged, like my job, which is hard, is
Mhm.
to really like try and
Yeah.
ground myself in uh, what has this person gone through? What did their
Yeah.
grandparents go through? What did their great grandparents go through?
Yeah.
How is my family of privilege a part of that story?
Yeah.
So it's kind of
Yeah.
like trying to, as me, I'm kind of just naturally, I'm a pretty much an insensitive jerk. Just in my daily interactions with people, I'm just not very
Yeah.
good at the social skills part of life. But
Yeah.
I'm kind of joking, but I'm kind of serious. And
Yeah.
so it's kind of a radical sensitivity
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
the experiences of others.
Yes, absolutely. I think that just being able to articulate what you need to work on to contribute to a deeper level of unity is like the ground zero, is the first step. Many people, they begin by thinking about what other people need to do first for them to be unified with ever accepting, as opposed to thinking, how do I need to change the things that are most a part of me, like my personality, in order to try to better the general state of affairs. So I love that you're able to just articulate that.
Well, I had a great experience with one of our both of our mutual best friends, Jamie Heath.
Mhm,
We got to do a little traveling together in the South,
mhm,
and one thing I noticed, he's African American, and one thing I
mhm,
noticed is that whenever he passed a fellow African American, he would
mhm,
really reach out. He would
mhm,
really be like, "Hey, brother,
mhm,
how you doing? Hey, how are you?" and have a conversation and a connection. And
mhm,
it's not like he didn't do it to white
mhm,
people or anything like that, but I was really remarking on this. I was really noticing this, like just the bonds
mhm,
of friendship that he was
mhm,
fostering. And I was looking at myself, I was like, do I do that? Hell
mhm.
no, I don't do
Yeah,
that. I
yeah,
I don't I'm not like I'm not overt racist. I'm not,
yeah,
but it's how am I being racist
yeah,
by not fight, fighting actively to
yeah,
encourage the bonds of connection
yeah,
with with people
yeah,
of different skin colors. And I
yeah.
really have learned this, and I really try to now. I'm not trying to get pats on the back. I just want to
No,
share
no,
my
I
personal
got you.
experience.
I love that.
Um,
Yeah.
to when I go in and I see black and brown people, like
Yeah.
it's my job to reach out to them,
Mhm,
connect to them. How are
mhm,
you today?
mhm,
Hello, I see you. I want to be friendly and connected to you.
yes.
Um,
Yeah.
and that's not any big shakes. You know what I mean?
But
That's not like
yeah,
really
but
changing
still,
the
life is
world.
made up of all of these little moments. I know for a fact that what happens is the vast majority of people as they move through the world, are not thinking in that way. And so many times, for example, when my husband comes home, he will have half a dozen experiences where people do the exact opposite of what you've done,
Wow.
right? Which is, just today, they will take time to if he's if he's working in a school, they will assume that he's not supposed to be there and ask him to come to the office to get a special badge. The cashiers will act like they're closed because they don't want to wait on him. They will do all kinds of things. So now imagine one bright spot where someone takes time to acknowledge, their mutual connection. It disrupts that pattern, and it is a big deal when it happens, right? All of the what people scholars call them microaggressions when it's like, the opposite. I don't think they're so micro. I think that it has a deep effect when you have to repeatedly deal with people who are dishonoring you, disrespecting you, ignoring you. So I think we should, just not minimize the actual impact it has when we acknowledge and respect our fellow human beings. In many parts of the world, the greeting for hello translates as I see you,
Mm,
right? And so this idea that we crave, we sustain ourselves on mutual recognition. And what we've done in racist societies is built entire structures that misrecognize and refuse to recognize the humanity of people. It's not only the day to day, but it's entire institutions which say you actually don't exist or you are lesser than, right?
Hmm.
And so you're right that the individual interactions are not going to necessarily challenge those bigger structures. We have other work to do, but they at least begin to disrupt the status quo, which is to say that, you are everyone, each one of us is worthy of that recognition and honor and mutuality.
Now, I have a question for you. Here's something that I have a little bit of a struggle with
Mhm,
in these kind of conversations. A lot of times, and especially if I'm reading on like Baha'i message boards
mhm,
or Facebook posts or something like that, sometimes I have a difficult time differentiating
mhm,
what's the difference between a Baha'i perspective on race and race unity and social injustices and just the political left and Black
mhm,
Lives Matter movement and commentators on MSNBC? And
mhm,
certainly there can be
mhm,
large segments of alignment
mhm,
from in as a Baha'i from both the right and the
mhm.
left, and that
Yeah.
uh, but what's the difference?
Yeah, I don't know that it's um so the way that I see it is that distinguishing um the Baha'i perspective from a political left perspective, I think that there's not really a need to sort of figure that I don't feel the need to figure that out. I think what the Baha'i perspective brings to any movement for social change is an insight into the spiritual dimensions of it, right? And so whereas oftentimes, the political priority is to address the material, the economic, the social aspects of the injustice, Baha'is add to that by saying, yes, we need to do all of those things. We need the laws to change. We need the institutions to be more just. We need to recognize the nobility and the inherent worth of Black life. But one of the core aspects of that is that this is a spiritual reality, right?
Hmm.
It's not simply that we're doing a political favor or being politically correct, because that's the way it's reduced. Is like to do all of this is to be politically correct. But no, we're being spiritually correct
Hmm.
by dealing with this. And so it brings the insight, I think the deeper level commitment to the social justice movements, that's for many people who are working in that area already have. They bring their own religious and spiritual insights to the table, and I think Baha'is are contributing to that, and so I don't necessarily feel like we have to spend so much time um, creating a new boundary between the Baha'i perspective and what social justice movements are doing, but to actually focus on the synergies and how we can contribute to them.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think one spiritual perspective about it is, again, Dr. Saidi talks about how ultimately racism and classism is a spiritual disease because if we're taught as Baha'is that everyone is a soul, everyone is a luminous, radiant soul, that through some random act or some cosmic act of the Creator, you were put into brown skin and I was put into white skin, but we're just luminous souls beginning a spiritual journey, then we see all 7 billion of us as beautiful,
Mhm.
struggling souls uh, beginning a long march into the eternity. And let's
Yeah,
help each other along the way.
yeah.
That's a different perspective.
It is a very different perspective, and again, it's like it breaks from the charity model because it's that me aiding you in this struggle is actually helping me, right? If we are one, then the idea that we are trying to create more just institutions and society, it's not simply going to benefit those who are obviously being harmed by it, but it's going to help all of us to live our true potential. So, some of the most insightful writings, for example, around the harms of slavery or the harms of any institution that's unjust, is the way that it robs those who are perpetuating that institution of their own humanity, right? And so, I think understanding that relationship between, change and our spiritual reality, right? That we're all going to somehow, but it doesn't mean that those who benefit aren't gonna have to sacrifice and give
Mm,
up stuff, right?
mm.
If you're unjustly hoarding resources in a society built to serve you, then you may lose something on the day-to-day material level, but you will understand that to be in service to your greater humanity.
That's great. Yeah, I like the idea of no charity, because my wife and I do educational work in Haiti, and I really, in spending a lot of time in the last 8 years in Haiti, realizing that handouts or the old idea of charity of like, I have something, you don't have something, I'm going to give you something to make myself feel better and you'll benefit from it, it's actually just corroded uh, developing nations. And that education, and why it's so important in the Baha'i Faith, universal education, education of women and girls especially, um, is education is empowerment,
Yes.
and it's hard. It's harder than
Yes.
giving out it's
Yes.
easy to go on a street corner and hand out bags of rice. It's
Yeah.
hard to like
Yeah.
help build a school and build up teachers and work with them and collaborate and take kids on a journey and
Yeah.
have them spread.
Yeah, I mean, but it also it's built on a much deeper form of respect for the potential of every person. Like, I recognize that you have the potential to contribute to your own society and to build your own society, right? And so it's built on a much deeper form of respect for what we each can do, not something that I have and you don't. The other model, it assumes a kind of deficit. You don't have certain things that I'm gonna give you, but you have everything you need. We
Mhm.
just need to move things out of the way that are stopping you from realizing your potential, right? And being able to build a society that can serve everyone.
I started reading this on your recommendation, the No Jim Crow Church, about the history of the Baha'i Faith in South Carolina. I want to get that writer on the show.
Yes,
It's a
you have to.
fascinating history. Do you have thoughts
Yes.
on that?
No, I definitely think you should get Louis Venter on the show to talk about the research for that book and the history that most Baha'is don't even realize in terms of the ways that communities were defying Jim Crow, defying the status quo. So thinking about it, that yes, we have to awaken to the history of racial domination and injustice, but there's always been this intersecting history of people fighting against it and working against it in their day-to-day lives, and oftentimes we don't highlight that intersecting history. That's the genealogy that we have to draw on now to be able to do the work we need to do, right? But only focusing on how things were terrible, however important that is, it neglects this other part of the history of how people have worked to defy it. And I think that book does such a great job, and I would love to hear that interview after you do it.
Yeah, it's amazing stuff. Early Baha'is institutionalized, but then how mental institutions were often used to kind of
Mm,
shut down strong black males. They were just kind of
mhm.
shoved into a
Yes.
mental ward. Run-ins
Yes.
that the early Baha'i communities had with the KKK and
Yes.
authorities trying to shut down interracial gatherings, just people gathering to have some tea
Yes.
together. And
Yes.
that was a revolutionary act.
Yes, but it shows you, like, again, I think our ideas about what's a small act and what's a big act are very misconstrued.
Mm.
Like, things that on the surface seem very small actually pose huge threats, right? And so oftentimes we should look to when things are trying to be stopped. If it seems small, it should be a clue for us. Oh, that actually is a very worthy a worthy effort because it's posing such a threat. And so the smallest acts of defiance and unity and justice are actually, I think, loom much larger as having impact than we think.
What's your biggest spiritual struggle right now?
Um, that is a good one. Um, I think w- one of them is really trying to encourage my sons on their spiritual path without overwhelming them and imposing all of my stuff on them, right? And so, it goes back again, we have this beautiful principle of independent investigation of truth than the Baha'i Faith. And oftentimes we think about it as only relation to people who are investigating the Baha'i Faith that are as adults. But I think it applies as forcefully within families. So much of religious history throughout human history has been that you inherit the religion of your parents and that you just, it's like DNA and that no, we don't want you to question. We don't want you to think carefully. We don't want you to find your own way. You just need to listen and follow. And I think really trying to apply what it means for my own sons to independently investigate truth, the truth with respect to religion, but the truth with respect to reality, right? Because I'm a teacher and I'm always on as a teacher, I'm like, I want people to listen and take in what I've learned, but I think I have to learn to shut that off a little bit. With my own sons so that they can develop their own capacity to ask questions and to think and maybe to defy me.
Mm.
and
Uh-oh.
so
Uh-oh.
and so I think, I think that it's starting now, but I'm trying to position myself in a way that I'm expecting that and going to embrace that rather than see that as them, seeing that their own path is somehow that they don't respect me or love me. I want them to be able to independently investigate life.
That's fantastic. How can people find out more about you and your work and your writings?
Very easy. So I have everything. I try to keep everything updated at ruhabenjamin.com. You can get free access to most of my publications. You can see what talks are coming up. You can see videos of prior talks, and you can contact me through the website.
This has been just a true honor, and thank you for being on the show. And I've learned so much, and I think all 4 dozen listeners are going to be ecstatic at what you've offered today.
Thank you, Rain, for including me. Luckily, it's archived, so when you really blow up to 1 million, all of the recordings will still be
They're going to
there.
be there. That's right. Thank you,
All right.
Doctor.
My pleasure. Thank you, Rain. Have a good day.
Bye bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to Baha'i Blogcast. Hope you enjoyed the episode and the conversation. Check out more fun Baha'i stuff on Baha'iBlog.net. Thank you so much, and good night.